This is Caffeinate Your Career, a series where I get to ask experts all the questions you want to know. I'm your host, Alicia Josie, and today I'm talking with Dawn Booker. She has so much experience in marketing and communications, and at the height of her career, she changed to a totally different industry and started her own travel business. I'm really excited to hear how she did it, so let's get into it. I appreciate you being here with us today, Dawn, taking some time out of your day to just chat with me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is exciting.
Yes. So we're just going to start off with some rapid icebreakers.
Okay.
You ready? Just answer with the first thing that comes to your head.
I can do that.
Okay. Favorite landmark that you've seen?
Eiffel Tower. It never disappoints. That's
Never
the word.
disappoint.
It never disappoints.
Okay. And show or movie that's nostalgic for you?
There are a couple, but the movie that kind of set it all off for me was Paris Blues with Sidney Poitier, Diane Carroll, uh, Paul Newman, and Joan Woodward. And I saw it as a child. And for me to see this black couple in Paris, and it was shot in Paris, it stuck in my head. And so I saw that film as a child, and it put visions of being in Paris. And it was considered very much groundbreaking at the time because Joan Woodward and Diane Carroll, it was made in '66. And they were just traveling through Paris as teachers and friends. And that was very odd for the day. And so for me to see that as a child in the 70s, I guess, really had an impression or made an impression.
Wow, it was planting seeds.
Yes.
So the last one is, what is your most prized possession?
My red combat boots.
Okay.
I'm looking down, but yeah,
Nice.
I bought these in Paris when I first moved there. I had all the kind of cool shoes like this, or shoes that I wore at home when I was getting in and out of a car, and every day my feet were drenched. Every day was a bad day foot-wise. And then I bought these boots, and I would just walk around Paris feeling so empowered, and they just make me feel cool. Whenever I put them on, I feel cool. So
Well,
I
they're
love
really
these
cute.
boots. Yeah, they're my
Love
faves.
them. Okay, so we're just going to kind of jump into the more serious questions
Oh,
now.
cool.
So if you just want to describe yourself so people can kind of understand you a little bit better.
Well, my name is Dawn Booker, as you said, and I am a travel curator and planner. My company, Packlight Global, we encourage and inspire women of color, specifically Black women, over 40, to travel, to see the world, to explore their bucket list and just take a minute and enjoy the beauty that's around them. I think very often women of a certain age begin to pour all their energy into their kids and their families and their jobs and kind of forget who they were. And so when I say pack light, I literally, it's not about your luggage, it's about your baggage. So I really mean like leave it all at home and, do the things that you want to do, what your heart desires. So we travel very culturally, on very culturally relevant trips. We always connect to indigenous people, and it's primarily a small group travel business, but I also curate intergenerational trips, private trips for couples and families, and a lot of girlfriend trips. So it's just really all about travel and enjoying travel and not sort of thinking of travel as a luxury, but as a necessity.
Mm-hmm. And can you share some of the places that you've taken people? I know Paris has
Sure.
to be
Yes.
one of them.
Well, yes, absolutely. So I did take a girl. It was called a girlfriend's trip to Paris. It was all mothers and daughters, and so that was one of the trips where the group included folks that were under 40. And I did that trip because my first trip to Paris was with my mom and my daughter. And so it was a very similar itinerary. So we've been to Paris, we've been to Bali, Morocco, Costa Rica, and South Africa. Next month we're taking a luxury train ride through Peru. And then in August, we have chartered a yacht to sail to Island Hop in Croatia. And so, and then the next two trips, or at the end of 2022, will be a trip to Tanzania, to the Serengeti, as well as Zanzibar, and then a food and wine tour in Italy,
Holy
the
cow.
Amalfi Coast.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about how you started Packlight Global? Like, what was the inspiration? How did
So
it begin?
it's a long and short story. The long end of it is that I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit, but I've always found myself in a corporate environment. And at one point, and so when I in my mid 40s moved to Paris to pursue my master's degree, when I got home, all my friends that were of similar education, primarily African American women, wanted to travel, wanted me to plan trips for them, wanted me to help them take their family or their friends to Paris. And then I came back and tried to work in a more traditional job, and that lasted about a year and a half. And Pack Light, the name itself came from Erica Badu's Bag Lady, because she talks about all the things that hold us down, all the things that, and for me, it had been fear in a lot of ways. It had been thinking of travel as a luxury, even though if I didn't go somewhere for a couple of years, it always felt very difficult. And I had been kind of straddling this world of academia, because I've been an adjunct professor for many years, and industry, and then always travel. And so the first trip to Bali really came because I kept seeing images of Bali. So pretty much all my trips come from a seed that gets planted, an image, something that makes me feel something when I see it. And so I gave someone advice at a wedding about travel, or about, they had a whole globe and you're supposed to write advice, and I just wrote Pack Light. And then when I got home, I said, "Oh my gosh, that's it. That's the name of my business." Because it was a map, and they wanted to travel the world.
I just got
And
chills.
so I just wrote Pack Light, and slowly but surely began developing the brand. So with my marketing background, I knew that I didn't want to just hang out a shingle. I knew that I wanted to build an audience. So I flipped all of my social media to be Pack Light. And this was 2 years before my first trip. I started a Facebook group, which grew to 800 or 900 people in a day or two. And then I've kind of closed it. I haven't, I've just really kind of organically allowed the identity that most people already saw in me that I didn't see in myself. I let it inform the way I did my business, the way I started my business. And so when I did my first trip, you talk about chills. I was thinking about this the other day. It was people that I love. It was friends from college. It was my sister, my daughter. It was one of my dearest friends that runs the Black Paris tours. She came. And so it really helped me to launch my business, but to also understand what it meant to logistically do this, the financial side of it, all of this with a little less pressure than if I had people that I didn't know. And so to this day, every trip has some extension. And I've had more than maybe, and my groups are small groups, so I've probably had around 150 in 2 years, and this is with the pandemic year and a half, or I guess 2 years, 20 and
gosh.
21.
We're almost at 2 years.
Yeah, so they've all come out of that first group. Somebody recommended somebody, because I think that, for me, my approach is experiential marketing. And so I think about everything that my clients or potential clients touch needs to represent the level of a trip that they'll have. And so I always kind of go for luxury. I make sure that the trips have some aspect that connects with the indigenous culture. We don't do voluntourism. I think that there are other ways economically to make an impact in a community, and a sustainable impact. And so we just really devour the places we go. We do some type of cultural lesson. We make sure that I employ, so the transportation companies, anybody that I use while I'm there, it is an extension of that culture, or I try to extend that culture. And so Packlight really kind of, for me, has allowed me to it allowed for the intersection of the marketing background that I have and had, and the love for travel, and then my master's degree was in global communications. And so it's all kind of intertwined together. And so it feels natural. It feels authentic. It feels like breathing. Sometimes it feels like work. I think people lie when they say if you do something you love, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like work, but it doesn't feel, I feel like I'm creating something that over time, the dividends will come back.
Yeah. I love what you mentioned about the experiential marketing, because I feel like if I were to go on a trip, I would come back and literally tell everybody, I'd be like, Dawn did such a great job. If you're going to take a trip, you have to go with her. So they're almost like marketing for you. And I want to get into your marketing background a little bit. Can you share some of the roles that you had leading up to starting Packlight?
So my career began, actually, I can go just a teeny bit back to undergrad. My actual undergrad degree is in broadcast journalism. So I worked at the local radio station, but almost all the way in my senior year, I went to a crisis communication seminar and fell in love, and realized that I wasn't as into broadcasting as I thought I was going to be, but I was more interested in sort of the research and creating messaging, and I didn't understand at the time what career I was leaning towards, but I was able to go to a conference in DC that was the National Black Media Coalition, and I saw all these journalists that looked like me and had a similar story as far as understanding what roles there are in media and in communications. So from there, I've had multiple roles in marketing in various industries. I worked on a trading floor for an energy company, a deregulated energy, but still as a marketing manager. And when I came to North Carolina, I worked for a startup as director of marketing. I worked for the state of North Carolina for the Department of Commerce, and planned and participated in a trade mission to China and to Japan. And then from there, I was the vice president of marketing at the Piedmont Triad Partnership here. And so always marketing roles. And I had an opportunity also to work for Mr. Bob Brown, who is credited with one of the first Black PR agencies, and he's from High Point. And he became a mentor for me. And so when I decided to move to Paris, he was very encouraging and very supportive, and I was working for him, with him at that time. And when I went to get my master's degree, it was really the most transformative experience, because I thought I was just getting a further degree. I was going to come home, work in marketing, in international marketing, and that was going to kind of be how my career went. But it was actually the biggest surprise was that when I got there, I was able to connect with my classmates in such a meaningful way. I received 2 fellowships to study in South Africa. And so I went and did some research and worked for an NGO, and then went back and presented the research. And so all of this kind of changed my whole perception of what my career could be and how it could look. And then when I came home, I looked for opportunities that would allow me to kind of be all these hyphenated things that I had become, and they really didn't exist. So I still teach. I teach at the American University of Paris, which is where I graduated from. They invited me to come back and teach a strategic communications class. I teach at Bennett College in Greensboro, and I'm going tomorrow to teach a course at a smaller college in Paris about American culture. So the class I'm teaching is on federalism of all topics, but to me, it's so impactful to understand the difference between states' rights and federal rights. Right now, my career feels like it is all those hyphens that I wanted it to be. And it's actually very exciting. And so I was the director of communications at Bennett College for the last 2 years during the pandemic. Now I'm stepping away to focus more on Pack Light and really to do so full time.
Yeah, that's exciting. I love that you just created that for yourself because, like you said, you came back and you tried to find something that had all those hyphenates and you couldn't find it, so you created it for yourself. So I love that.
And I think that, when I talk to my students, when I talk to my daughter, I always talk about how, everything you want to do, somebody has done or is doing. Just believe that you can do it. Work hard at it. And I'm not saying work hard at the sacrifice of career and family and all of that. I think that, hustling's good, but also working in your authentic space. There's something about how the hustling doesn't feel as tiresome as when you're hustling for someone else.
Yeah.
And executing someone else's dream. So always kind of have a little bit of something on the side that until you're ready to do that 100% for yourself. But I felt like it was time. And I also felt like there were a lot of women similar to me. I think that, 50 now, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it felt like before, but I don't know. I know that I travel, I enjoy good music, all of my friends do. We all are pretty much doing the same thing we were doing when we were 30 and 40. So I just think that you want to serve as an example for the next generation that it doesn't mean, that when you hit a certain age that all of your dreams are kind of set aside and you're just supporting a younger generation. I think that there's an opportunity for an intergenerational experience, and so I enjoy that.
So one of the things that I want to talk about, you mentioned Bennett College. So
Mhm.
prior to working there, I know last time we talked, you mentioned that you were oftentimes the only woman of color in the room. So
Right.
can you talk about that experience?
Yes. So for me, representation became a really important part of who I am and my identity and how I move in the world. I didn't realize that though, as when I graduated at West Virginia University, I was the only Black student that graduated in the School of Journalism, and as my career progressed, when I went on the trade mission with the state of North Carolina, I was the only African American, and as a part of that delegation, and so very often, I would not only be the only African American woman, I would also be the leader. I would be the one who planned everything or the one who had executed everything, and so I found it to be exhausting at times. But then also, I found there to be an opportunity. And so one of the things that I learned that made me more valuable in these rooms was strategy. And very often, marketing and communications are taught from a tactical perspective. Students are taught how to create a brochure or write for content or how to operate certain social media platforms or whatever, just the tactical. And what I do with my students is I teach them strategy. I teach them the planning process. I teach them the questions to ask. And so for me, that's preparing a student in a way that they would not have otherwise been prepared for opportunities that they may not have gotten. So I don't just teach marketing, I make sure that my students, I always tell them I'm a professional, not a professor. So when you leave my class, you will have skills. You will know how to write a strategic plan. You will know how the different items that you may execute fit into that plan. And so to me, that's a secret weapon. I taught them how to kind of jot down 4 things that can turn any idea, into a strategic plan so that you can formulate your thinking. And so these are little skills that have big dividends. But very often, if you're the only person of color in the room, there's no one that takes you on to mentor you that way. And so, I keep in really good touch with my students once they graduate. Very often they end up going to graduate school and getting a more precise education in either marketing or strategic communication because they've had these experiences. But yeah, I don't do a lot of exams, not many tests. I've never been on a job where they say, hey, do you know the definition?
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. But have I had to write strategic plans on every job? Absolutely.
So, one of the things that you mentioned whenever you were speaking about that experience is that sometimes it can be exhausting. So, I'm curious what advice you would give to someone who's in that space right now and they're like, I'm exhausted, I don't know what to do.
You have to decide what you want to stand up for. Do you want to stand up more for your career or for yourself? And that's a difficult conversation. I remember encouraging my daughter resigned, quit a job, and she was so upset. And I said, you made the right choice. You chose yourself. And I think that there are times when it's worth it to kind of stick it out. But what I learned, and it took me a huge chunk of my career to figure out that it's not your responsibility to change the culture of a whole organization or a company that you join. It's your responsibility to determine what your boundaries are, what your work ethic is, what works for you, and what doesn't. And if you find that you're in a place that you can't reconcile those two things, then you need to pursue something else. It's not worth it to be in these spaces and not feel heard, to endure microaggressions, to not feel valued. It's not worth it. And I think that sometimes, my generation was all about longevity. My generation, my father retired from the federal government after 30 years, and he's been retired for 30 years. And so for him, the fact that I've kind of left jobs is he can't figure that out. But I understand it. But I do think so that's the one piece of advice is just to understand what your boundaries are, what your work ethic is, and what your sort of personal mission statement is, and your cultural identity. If you understand those things, then you'll know where you fit in. But if you don't, then you'll chase money, you'll chase titles, you'll chase more responsibilities. But none of those things feel good if you're not valued in that space. And the other is to understand why you're there. So don't just quit. Like if you're working for a brand that can teach you how to launch a product, don't leave before you know how to launch a product. If you know it's not, even if you know it's not the right place for you. So learn something. You don't want to just have a resume filled with jobs that you have nothing to show for. And so, that doesn't make sense. And so I think that that's where there's kind of a generational disconnect is that, we were taught to stay forever. Get your pension, got to get the pension. And I think that some of the younger folks, they, move forward when they find something better or, when they're not challenged or whatever. But there's like a place in the middle where you get something, like you learn something, you make a connection, you have a skill to speak of. And so when you're chatting about your experience, either in an interview or as an entrepreneur where you're, proving your product in the market, you do have to share some of your own background. So if you've only been around tech, but you haven't learned technology, or if you've only been around certain things and you haven't learned it, you really haven't spent that time wisely. So, and, honor what matters to you. Yeah. Honor what matters to you. So if it's your family, then make sure you're not taking a job that requires you to work crazy hours that doesn't allow you to spend time with your family. Hustling is fine, but your family is those are your peeps. So, you don't want to just have work it's not all about work. It took me, like I said, most of my career to figure that out.
So, going into what a typical day or week is like for you, if there even is a typical day or week, what would you say that it's like?
Well, right now I'm in a transition, so now that's easier to answer. I think about maybe 6 months ago when I was heading communications at Bennett, and relaunching the brand, Packlight, and teaching, I was always in one space or another and sometimes overlapping in all three. So I sought my office space here at Frontier because I wanted there to be a sort of a clear indication that I was working on Packlight work. And so my work for Bennett College was around media relations, around student and faculty and staff communications, some marketing and branding, but for the most part, I was trying to think of solutions and execute solutions for communicating with students and other constituents of the college. As a professor, just always on the phone with one of my students, always texting, chatting about internships, opportunities, preparing lessons, things like that. And then Pack Light, oh my gosh, I could spend a whole 8 hours after doing all that looking for a resort in Santorini that offers cooking classes, or looking for a nighttime experience in Rome for a couple that's going to be there, just for 2 days and really wants to start their trip as soon as they get on the ground. So that part, the Packlight part is always, just looking and researching and procuring some of the best experiences. And then what I had to learn also as an entrepreneur was to seek help. And so now I have someone who helps me with finance. My daughter has a master's degree in arts management. And so she's been helping me with some of my marketing and social media. And then when we go on the trips, she does a lot. I'm going to be having an intern soon that can help with some things. So I'm getting better at delegating, because previously I would have said, all the financial stuff too, but I was never good at it. And so I feel grateful that I have someone very well trusted that has been helping me with the financial and business side of things, and it makes the work that I do feel better, because I know where I stand as far as finances. So that's very helpful. So yeah, my day is a mishmash. It's just it's a good mishmash. It's mine, and it's funny, when I was working for other people, I was probably doing all these things as well, because I've been teaching at Bennett for about 11 years. I always loved travel, so I was always planning my next place or my next trip or whatever. So it's kind of similar, but I'm doing it more as my actual career, as opposed to on my lunch break and soon as I finish work, and all morning almost running late for work looking for my hotel or whatever. So it's actually really cool.
Okay. And so whenever you're on these trips with people, the trips that you've planned, are you able to enjoy them, or are you doing like administrative tasks?
It's interesting. Sometimes both, right? So what I try to do, and comes from my years of marketing and event planning, and understanding that you have to. I don't leave anything for the last minute. I don't say I'm going to do anything on site, and that way, if there are emergencies, if something goes wrong or goes down or happens while we're in a place, I have the capacity to handle it, take care of it, and move forward. Again, my daughter is amazing on site. I guess she's been around for, just kind of the way that I do things. But I had to learn that these folks are on vacation. I'm running a business. they're on vacation. And I had to be very cognizant of how my business could potentially impact their vacation. So that was one of the biggest lessons I learned after the first or second trip, is that I had to keep it separated. So, if I have a roommate, it's only going to be my daughter, or I'm going to be in a room by myself, so that I'm able to do the work that I need to do. I always go in between 5 and 7 days early, and went to South Africa almost 10 days early. So I never want to see a place the first time that my guests see it. I make really good contacts locally. I have friends all over the world. And so I really try to now, by the time my guests get there, to be in vacation mode, so that my kind of stress about the logistics does not spill into their experience. And I had to learn that. Yeah, I had to learn that.
So what would you say are the hard and soft skills that are needed to do what you do?
I think a lot of what I do was informed by my early career when I worked for the energy company, I used to plan customer meetings and events for other energy companies and their spouses. And so we only used resorts. And so I had to do all of the logistics. And I taught myself really a lot of those skills. Now, I did go to, meeting the MPI, or Meeting Professionals International. I went to American Marketing Association conferences and International Association of Business Communicators. So I always was learning more and increasing skills, but it is an attention to detail. It is, whenever I do a trip, I visualize the entire trip. So I'm able to catch things. I'm able to think about where there might be pain points and address them before we get there. So I really think, not in this generic kind of attention to detail, but really actually knowing what those details might be, and then being able to pay attention to that. Also, as I mentioned earlier, being able to separate business from folks' vacation. And that's not as easy as it may sound, because you really are meeting with vendors and doing all these things. But again, I try to do all of that before they get there. And so it is a certain level of decorum, professionalism. You have to be, travel is not an exact science. And so you always need a backup and contingency plan. You need to develop good relationships. You want to treat vendors as partners. You want to be fair. Every trip I'm negotiating. So negotiation skills and understanding and respecting the what other people bring. Cultural understanding, so that you're not asking for things in a country that are inappropriate, and that you're not doing things, and that your group serves as good ambassadors. My marketing skills have been priceless. And then also kind of understanding who my customer is and who it isn't, and not spending really any time on who it isn't. So my customers are people who value experience over things. They are folks that are willing to not just pay for an amazing experience, but also trust that someone can create that for them. They have the ability to be flexible, because we can get somewhere. You can get to Europe and transportation can be on strike. All sorts of things can happen when you're traveling. And so it's not for the type AAA that everything has to be precise, that it just doesn't happen that way. And so understanding who my clients are and who they're not has been invaluable for me in the way I market. And I really don't mass market much because of that, because I want to make sure there's always a good fit, and that, because so I always say I curate the trip, and I curate the folks that go on the trip so that it can be a very meaningful experience.
Yeah. And that makes sense because if you're on a trip and there's only 10 people and those 10 people aren't really jiving, then that's not going to be
And I
the
haven't
best
had that yet.
experience. So
I have not had that
that's
yet.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, this sounds like such a fun career. Are there any downsides?
Yeah, I turned my favorite thing into my job. And so the week I usually go in early, I usually also do something in that place that feels like vacation. Because once the folks get there, I'm hosting again. And I also um, think that you have to walk this thin line because when I spoke about experiential marketing, that means that I don't want my clients to kind of see, behind the curtain. But at the same time, you have to be able to pivot if there needs to be a pivot. And so it's really it's really difficult. Like I've had difficulties when something doesn't go as I've planned, as they've planned, and I have to break it to them. Sometimes, when it comes to making sure that the back end, the business side, is that I've paid as much attention to that as I have to the trip and the curation of the trip. And one of the biggest benefits of my financial person is I used to kind of not. I didn't understand where I was, and so sometimes I would say I would offer a little bit of a discount here or an incentive for someone to come there. And I realized that that was actually not a good idea. And now I speak to her. And so it really has made me accountable because I'm sure many entrepreneurs will say it can be lonely. And sometimes you're making decisions that you wish you could say, is this a good idea? What do you think? And so I'm glad that I've started, kind of creating a team around me because that actually was the most difficult part.
Yeah. Are there any seasons that are tough for a business like yours?
I don't know if it's seasons. I usually like you mean like around the year like I don't see it that way because I've kind of figured out the flow of when I plan trips and then when I release them. And usually the first trip, well, for me, the first trip is typically in March or April. And so I have a planning season and then I have a travel season. The travel season, if I have to choose which one can be most challenging, it is the travel season because once I start, there's only a short time between each trip. And so, March and August, then August to October, then October to December. And so that happens really quickly. But then the next trip, right around July, I'm launching the next year's trip. And so I'm often in a planning mode for a good amount of time. And the one of the gifts of the pandemic is I had an extended planning time. So yeah, so we'll see. I mean, I'm considering adding maybe 2 more trips each year, but that'll really depend on if I'm able to get through this travel season in the way that I feel good about.
So now I want to go on to talk about advice for young adults. So I'm sure people have listened to this now and they're like, I may want to do this. This sounds really cool. So, can we talk about your education and work experience a little bit more? Which one did you feel like you relied on more, or was there not one that you relied on more?
I actually think it really is a combination. My career is a hybrid of both. The fact that I have like a true journalism degree has allowed me to understand sort of the benefits of writing, of clarity, of conciseness. I'm able to teach my students the skills that they are expected to have. not just sort of how to tactically do some things. So I do rely on some things that came out of my education. And my education extends to, again, the things that I learned in professional development, my master's degree, and my undergrad experience. So I do rely on that in a lot of ways. I also think I have an aptitude for research. Research is something that I love. And so that helps in graduate school, but it's the skill that I use more than anything. I always challenge people, there's nothing I can't find, and typically that's kind of the case. And so I love research, but thorough research, and research understanding, what you're looking for, and an ability to learn from your experiences. And so to me, like I said, it's a combination of my formal education, every job. That was my mantra. I don't know where I got it from, that I'm not leaving until I get something. And what I mean by that is until I learn something. So in one company, I learned how to launch products. Another company, I learned how to write a strategic plan. Another place, I learned about all the logistics for meetings and events. Um, you know, Other places, I was more responsible for online and content. So for me, just understanding, that my advice is really similar to what I said previously. It's really understanding what you're there for and making sure you don't leave until you get it.
What habits would you suggest that young people, young professionals start cultivating now?
Learn what work ethic means. Um, you know, there are brands that you can work for as a young person that are going to teach you. So brands like Chick-fil-A, brands like McDonald's, Disney. There are many brands and many internship opportunities that give you a chance to see what it means. And the reason that I named, the fast food brands was not because I'm encouraging people to go that route to get into a career. I'm saying understand what it means to have a work ethic. And very often, a work ethic means you are doing something that you don't necessarily want to do, but and it's not necessarily the end game, but you're still doing it to the best of your ability. You're still showing up. You're still coming in on time. You're, chatting with the people that you work for and with, and letting them know what your long-term goals are. If you're in school, it's turning in, not asking what the minimum requirement is, but actually being thorough in what you create for your courses. So to me, work ethic can override intelligence and ability sometimes, because being able to be relied upon, being someone who is always present and with a great attitude, those are things that cannot necessarily be taught, but they can be acquired, through taking these jobs for these major brands, and there are many retail brands, the Gap, that they really do teach you work ethic. And I know it sounds odd that I suggest that, but really, my first job was for Cedar Point Amusement Park on Cotton Candy Midway. And my parents dropped me off in the summer, and I called them a week later, and I was like, okay, I'm coming home. This was good.
It was an overnight
No,
job?
it was Cedar Point has a very similar structure as Disney. So they recruited at colleges, only at colleges. You had an apartment, a dorm, and then you worked in the parks. Very similar to the Disney college program. And my parents were like, no, you're staying. But doing that, and I mean, I worked in food. I was cotton candy, but I was also there with other college students. I learned all these skills. I stayed to the end and received the incentive pay that you received for staying to the end, which I was able to put towards college. But it taught me, there was something about that experience, that allowed me to understand, because I seriously thought I was going home. I mean, because one week I had to work like a 10-hour shift, And on a Saturday at an amusement park in the summer,
You're like,
I was, yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
And my parents came and got me on the last day of the program.
Yeah.
That's what that was. And so, but it taught me. That was where I look back and say a lot of the work ethic that I have came
Yeah.
from.
And that makes sense because, like you said earlier, there are going to be the downsides to doing something that you love, and you're going to have to push through to be able to be successful at that thing that you love. So that's great to go ahead and just get used to doing it.
Might as well.
So, what I want to talk about now is what would you do if you could go all the way back to just fresh out of college? Would you change anything, or would you
You know
do
what?
the same way?
I would change something. I would have spent more time doing things that I love. I would have spent more time with people that I love. I would have spent it would have been more personal than professional. And I tell my students, it may not be popular advice, but I tell them, think about yourself holistically, not just your career. And I was very career focused and career minded when I got out of college. It was sort of when I was in high school, my mother had me in the Business and Professional Women's Youth Club. Like I was a president of my junior achievement company. It was kind of always a part of me. And, yeah, it served me career wise, but personally, I spent a lot of time cultivating that. And as a late bloomer, I've began cultivating other aspects of myself later in life. So I got my passport at 38, 39. So, because I was working all the time. Now, I traveled all over the US, but not much outside of it. And so I would have traveled more. I would have loved more. I would have spent more time with family. I would have had more balance. Absolutely. And I encourage my students to do that. Gap year, all that stuff. Travel around Europe, all the things that we were told, especially my generation, were told, you should absolutely not do, but yeah, I would have done all of it. Made more mistakes, quit a job, all the stuff, all the things. So, and I encourage people to do all the things. I think that it's not just about your career. So.
I love that advice. So if there's somebody who is fresh out of high school, fresh out of college, and they're like, I want to do what she's doing, this travel experience curating, what could be a potential route that they could take?
That's actually the most difficult question you've asked me, because I feel like it feels so authentic to me that it almost feels kind of inauthentic to answer that by saying, well, you have to do this, this, and that. I think it's more about entrepreneurship than it is just travel. So I hope I'm answering this in a way that it's useful, because for me, my path was so organic that I'd be kind of making it up if I said I had to do this, this, and that, because I really don't know. I didn't leave many breadcrumbs. But I would say, from an entrepreneur perspective and an experiential company, whether it's travel or planning events or wedding planning, I think that understanding the industry, understanding how marketing works, understanding the problem that you're solving, understanding what your customers look like, and being inclusive in that idea of what they look like. Always continue to hone your skills and understand what your industry requires. But because there are routes, there are travel agent routes, but I'm not a travel agent. There are, working for hospitality. So there are many ways to be travel adjacent. But I think my path is a little, like I said, organically happened. So, but I do know hospitality, and there are great programs all around the country for hospitality. Um, Getting with a brand that can expose you to the types of travel and the level of service, because if you're interested in luxury travel, then you need to know what that looks like and the service industry looks like. And if you're interested in catering to a certain demographic, then you need to understand what they need and what they like. And so I think there's a lot of ways to be in the travel business. Um, but I also think that it's about being authentic and finding your tribe and the niche that works for you, and then pursuing that as an entrepreneur or even as a side hustle if that's more comfortable. I don't, you know, Damon John wrote, Don't Quit Your Day Job, about how important it is to make sure that this side hustle is something that you actually do want to do full time. And so I would say, if there's something that you really want to pursue while you're still working, check it out.
Try it. Yeah.
Try it. Do some volunteering. Do some job shadowing, things like that, or start a little something on the side. So, yeah.
So, on the other end of what you were doing in your career, I want to ask advice for people who are looking into doing marketing and communications. So, I graduated in 2020 and I had quite a few friends that studied marketing and communications and are struggling to find a job right now. So, I'm curious what your advice would be to those people.
To learn strategy, to learn to focus on a niche. It's to expand their idea of what marketing is. I think that some folks believe that marketing is just one thing, but marketing is event planning, marketing is product marketing, it is content, it is integrated strategic communications and marketing. In some companies, it's PR, it's government relations, it's public affairs. I think that, and this happens with my students very often, they're looking for marketing manager jobs right out of school. And if you haven't done any internships, if you don't have skills to speak of, and my last internship, I was in graduate school, 40 something years old, and I did an internship in South Africa. So, if you don't have the skills, you have to be honest with yourself. A degree does not get you a job, not anymore. And so if you haven't done an internship, if you haven't studied abroad, if you haven't developed any interest, because very often a marketing role really has to be, there's a level of maturity that has to be, and that's not age. I'm saying maturity in that you've been around business. You understand why you're doing something. You have a familiarity with the culture of a business, but also what their goals and objectives are. So once you, and very often, I mean, I hate to say it so simply, you need a little bit more. Like an MBA might be what you need, or a specific, a more specialized degree. You need to get the experience. You need to understand how to do it, because there's nothing worse than having an opportunity that you're not prepared for. And so while you're looking, LinkedIn has some amazing classes on marketing. There are other the MOOCs, or the online courses. There's lots of ways to get the skills, but you can look into the nonprofit world and do some volunteering, but I would really be looking for an internship. Recent grad, if you can't find a job, an internship. And sometimes you have to balance an internship with another type of job that actually helps you pay your rent or take care of your responsibilities. An internship can be something you do 2 or 3 days a week. It doesn't have to be a full time. I mean, if you have responsibilities, it's very difficult to do a full-time internship if it's not paid. But now most internships are paid. And so it's actually difficult to find one that isn't paid. And so, but yeah, get the experience, travel, understand how networking looks. Networking is not going to an event with a bunch of business cards or your resume and then immediately calling somebody about a job. That's not. It's cultivating relationships, and sometimes that happens when you volunteer, when you help, when you show up in a space that people don't expect you to be in. I always have volunteered. It's always been a part of my career, and all of those so I worked for the Full Frame Film Festival for almost 7 or 8 years up until I went to Paris. I worked with the the National Black Theater Festival in Winston. I did that. It worked in their PR department as a volunteer, just always doing that. But I meet all kinds of people from doing those types of things. But yeah, number one, you have to have the skills. So get the skills if you don't have them. Number two, expand your mind on what marketing actually is. It's government relations. There's just so many things that marketing is. I mean, what you're doing is marketing. It's absolutely marketing. And so I think that people are looking for just a title that says marketing manager. And if they can't find that, then they don't think they have a marketing job. And that's not necessarily the case. And so almost any job that has relations at the end of it is related to marketing. So yeah, it is really about expanding your idea of what it is and understanding how your unique skill set can help and support a business, and then just being realistic if you have skills or not. Because if you don't, if you just have the degree, that's not enough.
Okay, so we are at the final three now, so we're going to leave the audience with some things. So the first is your advice for something for them to read or watch.
One of my favorite books is Good to Great by Jim Collins, and I like it because there's an emphasis on the intersection of entrepreneurship and leadership and effective leadership. And I have it on audiobook, and so I've listened to certain chapters multiple times. I think it's a really good book. Another book, and I'm not sure the author, but it's The Art of Seduction. And it actually talks about seduction in many ways, but it's really about getting people to understand and to listen and to be engaged in more ways than just, romantically. So I've actually really enjoyed that book. So those.
Next is a topic for them to research deeper.
The word representation is being used a lot. And I think as a buzzword, folks are misunderstanding what it means, what representation actually means. People I've heard it used as almost like a charity thing, like a gift. We're going to give you representation or allow representation, when really representation is less about giving anybody anything. It's passing the mic. It's letting someone speak for themselves. It's not just including someone else's story, but it's allowing them to tell their own story. Representation is not just having people in the room. It's creating a space where they're comfortable in the room. And sometimes representation can be uncomfortable for the majority. But you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because in these spaces that we talked about where, there lacks representation and representation extends beyond race. Representation is about people of different backgrounds, of different ages, people who have different abilities. It's really creating a space where everybody can be authentically themselves and not be granted entree into a majority space. So I think representation is really important to me. as a part of my personal mantra, but it allows people to see others outside of the way that maybe stereotypes or other preconceived notions, when you actually are creating diverse and equitable opportunities. So not just granting representation, but kind of requiring it, and then stepping aside if necessary, so that someone can actually create for themselves and represent themselves.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And lastly is a final piece of advice for viewers on their journey.
Man, I feel like for me, Packlight represents purpose. And anyone who knows me knows that probably the last 10 years of my career were spent searching for purpose. And so I recently said to one of my friends that finding purpose is like falling in love. Not everyone does. And if you do find your purpose, you need to do whatever it takes to protect that, to make sure that you pursue that, that you are authentic in exploring. But purpose is everything. And so if you find it, you should always protect that. And it's not, no one has to get it but you. And purpose is sometimes just that thing that you do that makes you not just feel happy, or because you won't always be happy in pursuing your purpose, but you will be fulfilled, and you will be able to be authentic. And sometimes if you avoid your purpose, you find that the space never feels the energy, the space never feels the way that it should. So to me, purpose, understanding, pursuing that, like always trying to figure it out, listen to the cues. So what did I do in this job, in this experience, that made me feel just exactly the way I want to feel? And pay attention to that, because the more you understand that, the closer you are to purpose. And it's never too late. It's never too late to figure that out. I mean, I was over 50 when I figured out what my purpose is. And so, yeah, purpose it's everything, because it allows you to really authentically work in your space, and or be in a space and command it, to own it, to feel good taking up that space.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. Yeah, this was
You made
fun.
me think today.
Yeah. We got to get deep with it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. And to see more Caffeinate Your Career episodes, click the link on screen.